Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Whitty. This is Ian Sons. We're with Curare Physician Recruiting. We're here to do something a little bit different today. In honor of the Final Four, we thought we would take the states represented by the Final Four teams, put them into a similar setup, and debate which of the four teams is going to be the best state for a physician to go to, and come up with a winner. So the brackets are set up as we've got South Carolina against Washington, home of Gonzaga University, and Oregon against North Carolina. So let's jump right in.
Sure.
We got South Carolina versus Washington.
Okay. Well, one thing I know about any physician when they're looking to make a change is they really want to know how friendly is this state to a doctor. And many times what that translates into is, have they had tort reform or not? You know, how litigious an environment is this state to practice in? Any physician, whether you're coming out of training, you've been in practice for a long time, you've heard horror stories about, non-capped states, incredible settlements, whatever it might be, and you're fortunate if you can get through a career without having one or two of these things come up. But one thing that I know about Washington is Washington is a state with no cap on their malpractice settlements. And so I think, approaching that from a physician-friendly perspective, that's not terribly good. Whereas South Carolina is, I'm not going to say is totally the opposite, but is much more friendly. Certainly, they do have a cap on their malpractice. I think it's around $1 million. And also a much more advantageous state in terms of the kind of mix of physicians to patient population, and that's something that you had looked into a little bit, Dave.
Opportunity versus competition factor, and South Carolina comes in at the 26th state with the most opportunity for a new physician based on a study by Wallet Hub, and Washington comes in number 31. So it's not a huge difference there, but there is a little bit more opportunity in South Carolina than there is in Washington for a new physician.
I think a lot of it's going to depend, too, on the type of person you are. Do you want to live in a bigger city? Are you really into outdoors, going hiking, camping, kayaking, whatever it might be? Do you like to hunt, things like that? I think Washington is a state where people who really love the outdoors are going to enjoy it. It's a much more moderate climate year-round. Certainly it does get cold, but it's going to give the option to be outdoors pretty much all the time. South Carolina, not that it can't do that, but it definitely gets a lot hotter there. And so it's not necessarily something where you're going to be able to enjoy going out on a hike when you're getting all sweaty all the time.
So a big difference I saw is the Wallet Hub study combined all of the factors and came up with South Carolina as the third most physician-friendly state in the United States, whereas Washington came out 25. So that's a big leap right there when you combine all the factors.
It sure is, and I think that has a lot to do with population density, and that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later. But when you consider kind of the makeup of the state of Washington, you've got Seattle, and then there's a pretty significant drop-off when you begin to look at the population of other communities within the state. South Carolina, not so much. It seems to be spread out a lot more. There's a lot more communities that are closer together of a similar size, and it seems like those cities and communities are continuing to grow. There's a lot more, I think, rural areas in Washington, although it might not be associated with that in a lot of people's minds. You go too far east of Seattle, there's just not a lot there if you're starting to get closer to the border. So South Carolina, like Dave said, great place to practice. Seems like we've got a lot of jobs there, a lot of good opportunities, and they do have caps in their malpractice rate. So overall, it seems like a pretty physician-friendly state.
So if we had to pick a winner between the two?
I would pick South Carolina. It just seems like greater opportunity, more chance for success, less worry about are there going to be enough patients for me to grow my practice and be successful here. You're not worried so much about competition. However, if you're just someone that really likes to forge their own path, you're okay being in a small town, having a very large service population, catchment area, maybe 2-3 hours. Maybe you do want to go to a smaller town in Washington and enjoy kind of a more secluded lifestyle.
All right, and of course a lot of this is all personal preference.
Exactly.
All right, next up is Oregon versus Washington. North Carolina. Oregon versus North Carolina. Interestingly, just to go a little negative here, I did some research on schools of the school systems for the 4 states, and my preconceived notion had South Carolina as having the worst school system, but it does not. North Carolina has the worst school system across the state. So that went against the conventional wisdom, and that's I think that's going to be a pretty big knock on North Carolina going forward.
I agree. I think there's a lot of people who look at the state of North Carolina thinking of it as very family friendly. There's a lot of universities there, a lot of industry there, and Charlotte being the 5th largest city in the country, the tremendous amount of financial institutions based there. You've got the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area with all those universities. You've obviously UNC, Duke, North Carolina State. You've got an additional Research Triangle Park, which houses a tremendous amount of science industries, pharma industries, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of people who I think relocate there because their significant other is also going to be able to easily secure employment given the size of those communities and job opportunities available. But like Dave said, if you've got kids, it's something that might give you some pause, thinking about, am I really going to be able to provide for them in the right way with the school systems that are there? Not to say that there aren't good schools or there couldn't be alternative options, but I agree. It was surprising to me to find that of these 4 states we're looking at, their public schools were ranked the worst.
Yeah, that's interesting. When it comes to the opportunity and competition, both Oregon and North Carolina seem to have pretty good opportunity. There's 32 for North Carolina, 45. So they're kind of lower middle pack there. So that's a really close in terms of if you go to North Carolina, are you going to get successful quickly? Are you going to be busy enough? Are you going to be really competing for patients? And it's between those 2 states, it's pretty close. But you got to give the edge to Oregon in terms of opportunity for a new physician.
I certainly agree with that, and part of that is not just the research that I've done, but really anecdotal evidence over my years of doing this. I would say, for every one physician I have that tells me that they want to go to Oregon or Washington, for instance, kind of that Intermountain West, I've probably got 10 physicians who tell me that they want to go to North Carolina, and I think the reality is that that talking about earlier, that Raleigh-Durham area, Charlotte. Those are some of the most competitive markets in the country. So if you're considering going there, just know up front that you are not being recruited to those areas because there's a true need for the service. It's not because there aren't enough physicians for the patient population. It's because a practice feels like they can be in position to get additional market share and take that away from other employers in the area. And so, that's not always a recipe for success. Just like any job, you've got to do your due diligence. But I think just knowing that makes Oregon a lot more attractive because I think going into it, there are growing areas there. You're going to have an opportunity to continue to grow your practice and see your earnings increase based on your productivity and capturing greater market share without feeling like you're kind of, for lack of a better term, stabbing each other in the back, trying to get the best deal, trying to get the most patients. And that can be challenging at times and can make you feel like you're just getting burnt out, I think, if you're working so hard and the return isn't there.
I think if you look at the studies, the medical environment between the 2 states is very close, a little bit of an edge to North Carolina, but not significantly so. Yeah. So well, this is a little tighter competition here, but I think between the 2, I got to lean a little towards Oregon.
I think I would as well, strictly from looking at a long-term success angle, and I know I spoke about it a little bit earlier, but in terms of malpractice rates, North Carolina does have an edge there, but I don't think that's enough to force you to look one way or the other. I think really what you've got to do as a physician is investigate opportunities that are going to put you in a position to succeed, not just in the short term and the long term. I think Oregon's going to be a better match for that.
All right. So that brings us to our final 2. We've got South Carolina versus Oregon.
Which I think would be a pretty good matchup to see personally, Dave.
I'd
like to see that in the championship game. I don't think anybody wants to see UNC again. Sorry, Tar Heel fans. Anyway, so South Carolina, Oregon, final 2, what it comes down to. So one thing that Dave and I noted coming into this is that all 4 of these states have really lovely coastlines. They're all going to give you access to their respective oceans, Atlantic and Pacific. And so, one of the big differences, though, I think is going to be the climate that you have. I think historically, when a lot of people think about Oregon and Washington as well, they think about a lot of rain. And they might think, well, it's dreary there, it's gloomy. I don't know if I can handle that. I need my sunshine. In reality, the volume of rain there is far less than in most places. For instance, our corporate headquarters here is in Bloomington, Indiana. Go Hoosiers. And we actually get a lot more rain here than they do in Seattle. So, keep in mind, those areas that are known for rain, it might be a short shower every couple days, 10, 15 minutes, but you're not going to have days upon days of downpours out there. That's just not how it works.
Like we're going to have today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Schools between the two. South Carolina is coming around 32nd. Oregon's coming around 25th. Oregon is 17th for overall medical environment. South Carolina is 3rd for overall medical environment. This is a really tough one. You can make a case for either one of these states, and
you could.
It's going to be
something to keep in mind as well. I think with living in South Carolina, you're going to have easier access to other major metros that are within a closer proximity than if you're in Oregon. It's going to be a longer time to travel if you want to go to different areas. But I don't know. It is tough to say. If I had to pick one, I would probably give the edge again to South Carolina. I feel like their combination of having good malpractice rates, relatively low cost of living in comparison to some of these other areas. You've got good school systems there. You've got a lot of room for advancement within your career. There's certainly a need for physicians in South Carolina. I think all those things really combine to give it a slight edge, but it's not that much. And as Dave said, I think a lot of it's personal preference.
Well, and the purpose of this exercise is without any other factors, just where can you go and find the best job the fastest, and I think that goes to South Carolina. So I think South Carolina wins our...
I think it does. That remains to be seen whether they will actually win the tournament. But hit us up with some comments. If you watched the video, let us know who you think might come out on top in these 4 states, not just in terms of your preference for practice, but also maybe who you think might do well in the tournament.